What is up, YouTube? It's Millzy, back with Hometown Commander. It's time for another episode of Millzy Revisits, the show where I have been going back through, rebrewing, retooling, and redesigning all of the decks in my main box and my test box. And today's a fun one because this is a deck I did have built before, but I finally brought it back to the box. And I have to say, I think I really love the new iteration of it. And also, worked on a pretty fun project. So if you saw in the last episode, I showed off my shrines list with some custom proxies, and that was a fun project to do for me because it was a deck that I really enjoyed, and I got the chance to go through and have some fun. Well, Sythis is probably my favorite Enchantress deck I've ever played, and I wanted to do something special. So Sythis, in its original printings in Modern Horizons 2, came in this pretty little sketch frame. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a whole deck of sketch frame cards? Now, most of the cards in the deck have a sketch frame. There's a few that don't, that I couldn't make just due to some not figuring out how to use the tools properly reasons. But the rest of them have sketch frames. So we're just going to do a little deck tech visually as opposed to on the computer like normally for this series. And the deck list is down in the description. If you want to see the list, please let me know what you think of it down in the comments. But without further ado, let's get into the deck list. So really first, I want to talk about kind of our combos and we were looking to win. The first is our classic Walking Ballista Heliod combo. Walking Ballista and Heliod can be infinite as long as you have enough mana. Normally 6, but you can do it, most of the time I like to do it with 8. So the way it works is you're going to already have Heliod out in the battlefield. You're going to, I like to cast Walking Ballista for 6 instead of 4, which you would need to do to get the X to be 2. I like to do it for 3. That would bring it down with 3 +1 counters on it. And then you remove a counter from it to try to deal 1 damage to target. You would respond with Heliod's last ability by giving this lifelink. It deals the damage, and it then would deal damage to what has lifelink, and you gain the life back. Heliod's ability goes off, putting the counter back on it, and rinse and repeat. So that's a pretty fun combo, and it is one of the win cons, although most of the time we don't use that. Most of the time, the big combos we want to use is this right here, Sanctum Weaver, and we're going to attach it with Gauntlets of Light. Gauntlets of Light allows it to pay 2 and a white and untap this creature. Sanctum Weaver taps for X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments we control. As long as we have 2 other enchantments, but these 2, we'll have 4 enchantments, meaning if we tap for 4 white and untap for 3 white, we will net a white mana, and we can do this enough times to net infinite amount of mana of any colors we want. Of course, we only are going to be able to use green and white, but we can definitely use a lot. And then I added Instill Energy. This is an older card, but I think this works really well because it gives Sanctum Weaver haste, which allows it to tap the same turn it comes down. And then what it actually does is once per turn you can untap it, and that's pretty cool because that means we can get 2 activations of Sanctum Weaver, whereas Gauntlets of Light we can only get 1. But this just adds us a second one of these to kind of push the strategy forward. Now if we had blue, we would have Freed from the Real and Penman's Aura, which would give us more opportunities to go infinite. Because we're only in green white though, we only have Gauntlets of Light, so Instill Energy is just in there as another way to push that forward. Then our last one is Siona, Captain of Pyleus, and then Shielded by Faith. This is whenever an aura becomes attached to a creature you control, create a 1/1. And this is whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, attach this to it. So this is going to create as many tokens as we want, because we can always cancel this by not attaching Shield of Faith, because it's a May ability. It's not an automatic ability. So we can stop it anytime we want to, but we basically would just make an infinitely large number of 1/1s, and we are playing some enchantments like Concordant Crossroads to give all of our creatures haste, and that would allow us to end the game that way. Or we just take advantage of some other triggers. All right, well, let's go through our creatures first. And there aren't a ton of them because, to be honest, this deck cares a lot about enchantments. And most of our creatures either are enchantresses or have something, are enchantment creatures, or have something to do with enchantments. First off, Jukai Naturalist, making all of our enchantments cost 1 less. And it is an enchantment, so it procs Sythis. Sythis, of course, is going to gain us life and draw us a card every time we cast enchantments. So what this is going to do is keep us casting and keep us drawing. Courser Crewfix, allowing us to play lands from the top of our library, and then whenever a land comes in, we gain a life, and we get to look at the top card of our library. It appears revealed. This is great because when Sythis starts drawing us cards, we can see what's coming and help plan out our turn. Yes, it does give information to our opponents, but I think most of the time your opponents aren't going to understand some of these little intricacies and enchantments to know what you're expecting to see. Weaver of Harmony, for 1 green and tap it, we can copy activated or triggered ability from an enchantment source we control, and our enchantments get +1/+1. There's plenty of things we can target with this, but it's just in here to help enable some other effects. Monastery Mentor is going to make us a 1/1 monk every time we cast a non-creature spell, which is almost every spell in our deck. This is just going to help us get some blockers down and kind of keep us afloat in that mid-game. Eidolon Ablasis draws us a card every time we cast an enchantment, or when it or another enchantment enters the battlefield, the Constellation ability, and that goes really far because it's going to keep us drawing cards and getting into the things we need. Cetacean Champion, very similar, draws us a card whenever an enchantment comes in, but we also put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it's great to get Cetacean Champion very big. Destiny Spinner, creature and enchantment spells you control can't be countered, which is massive when we start getting into our combo lines. And then 4 mana, we can make a land an XX, where X is the number of enchantments we control. We could copy that with Weaver Harmony. We could do plenty of other things, but that's a great way to end the game because it gets trample and haste. Dryad the Lucian Grove, we can play an additional land, and then the lands we control are each land type. And according to the other types, the great thing here is it's just an enchantment. So it's a creature and it's an enchantment. It's going to proc everything for us. And then Archon of Sun's Grace, whenever enchantment enters the battlefield, we get a 2/2 Pegasus creature token, and then all Pegasus creatures we control have a lifelink. This is great. It's going to keep us having blockers around to help protect us, but it's also going to allow us to hopefully out-life gain some of the damage that we're taking. Or sources. We're only playing 1 artifact in the deck, and it's Aetherflux Reservoir. The reason is because we're probably going to eventually play enough enchantments and get enough life on our long turns where we can use the added life gain here to probably knock all of our opponents out. If we play that first spell and we get 1, play the second spell and you get 2, play the third spell and you get 3 life. You see, this is going to stack up, and if we have a turn where we're making an infinite amount of mana and we're casting lots and lots of enchantments, and we'll get into a couple enchantments that go infinite with different cards depending on or give you so much value all of the time depending on how much mana you have, you're going to see that this is going to come really, really, really useful with that. Let's get into just the few spells that we're playing, because to be honest, we're not playing a ton of them, but they're really important. First off, Approach of the Second Sun. This is another win con because we draw so many cards with Sythis and we have so many ways to play cheap enchantments. If we play this, we can put it 7 from the top. We should be able to play enough enchantments to get back into our hand. Open the Armory. This is going to go get Shielded by Faith for that combo. This is going to get Gauntlets of Light for that combo. It just helps us out in getting different things. This can also go get us things like Ancestral Mask and All That Glitters, but we'll talk about those in a second. Resurgent Belief to bring all of our enchantments back. Enlightened Tutor to go get our choice of enchantment or artifact. Heroic Prevention to protect our board, and Worldly Tutor to go get our choice of creature. Most of the time, Worldly Tutor will go get Heliod or Walking Ballista if we see either of them for that combo. But to be honest, most of the time, we're not really using them. All right, let's slam into the absolutely massive stack of enchantments that this deck plays. And that makes sense, right? Because we're playing an Enchantress deck. So we want to play all of the enchantments we can. So we're going to go through them in a random order. Anointed Procession makes twice as many tokens instead of 1. This is great with Siona or Archon of Sun's Grace, just to give, or Monastery Mentor, just to give us more and more creatures, help us defend if we need to, or help us push through if we need to. Smothering Tithe. Although our deck doesn't care about artifacts, we won't mind the extra mana, and it also just helps tax out our opponents just that teeny bit. Sterling Grove, one of the best enchantments for an Enchantress deck, is going to give all of our other enchantments Shroud, which can be kind of a pain sometimes because it doesn't allow us to target our own enchantments, but at any time we can pay 1 and sacrifice it to search for an enchantment, put it on it, reveal it, and put it on top. This is great because since we know we draw with Sythis, we can do this in response to casting an enchantment if we need to really find something, or we can do this before our turn to guarantee the draw. Karmic Justice, whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls destroys a non-creature permanent we control, which is a lot of permanents. We can destroy target permanent that opponent controls. The great part here is this is going to make our opponents think twice about destroying our things because we could just destroy something of theirs back. Stony Silence does kind of shut down Smothering Tithe and some Affix Reservoir in our deck, but Stony Silence is going to pretty much primarily just shut down our opponents. And in the scenario where we're just trying to shut down our opponents, what this is going to do is this is going to just keep us running forward, and we're going to be able to take advantage of not needing to play the minimal amount of artifacts we have, whereas our opponents are going to have to figure out how not to play with the ones they have. Grasp of Fate. When enters for each opponent, exile up to one target non-land permanent that player controls until it leaves the battlefield. This is 3 mana to potentially get rid of 3 things, and it's pretty cool. Of course, if you hit a commander, the commander can go back to the command zone, but everything else just ends up losing, they're going to lose access. Abundant Growth, 1 mana to draw a card, which with Sythis out would draw us 2 cards, but then that land has tap mana for any color. This is just a really cheap way to get another card off of Sythis, keep the train running. There becomes a point in every Sythis game where your hand is full of lands and you might be close to top decking, and Abundant Growth is just going to help us kind of charge through another couple extra cards. Meticulous Excavation from Brothers War. It's a 1 mana white enchantment, which again does a very similar thing to Abundant Growth. It helps us draw an extra card if we have that spare mana. But for 2 and a white, we can return something weak, a permanent, to its owner's hand. If it has an earth, instead exile it, then return it to its owner's hand. Activate only to your turn. Well, there's a couple enchantments that we may want to bring back, or if we have enough mana, we may want to play our creatures again or play our enchantments again to get more value. And if we have all of that spare mana, we don't mind paying the 3 to bring it back. All That Glitters. A creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment or artifact you control. A lot of games, it is going to be a lot. So we're going to get a lot of value off All That Glitters. Wild Growth, making our lands tap for an additional green. We really like the enchantment ramp instead of the sorcery ramp because we get double value from it, right? We get the draw that we get off of casting it, and then it does a very similar thing for us. Aura Silence. Artifacts and enchantments your opponent's control cost 2 more to cast, and we can sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. The one thing that's really important about some of these cards like Aura of Silence and a couple others we're going to talk about that we can sacrifice at instant speed to destroy target artifact or enchantment is that so many combo-based strategies in Commander linchpin around artifacts and enchantments. And I think if we bake just a couple of these in here, we can hurt our opponents, and then if we're playing a deck that we know needs some of those linchpin artifacts and enchantments to win the game, we can tutor one of these up or keep one of them around. That way we always have it. Concordant Crossroads, that's what I was talking about before, giving all of our creatures haste. Earthcraft, a old expensive card but does very good in this deck. Tap an untapped creature you control, untap target basic land. The great part about this is we're untapping a creature from this ability and not the creature's ability, so this can tap those tokens that we make, basically giving us infinite mana if we can make all those tokens. Enchantress's Presence, drawing us a card every time we cast an enchantment, so we're doubling up on the draws with Sythis. Fertile Ground, coming down and making our mana tap for additional color. Now, some of the cool cards that we can loop infinitely if we have enough mana are Whip Silk and Flickering Ward. The way these two work is for a single mana, we can equip them to enchant a creature, and then for a single mana, we can return them to the hand. But the important part here is that every time we enchant a creature with them, we're casting an enchantment and drawing off of Sythis, and then we can bounce them back to our hands. So if Sanctum Weaver can tap for 12 mana, let's say, I can Whip Silk 6 times and return it back to my hand, and that's going to give me 6 draws, and 6 activations, and keep things moving. These two are really important because they're going to fill out those big turns where we're trying to draw into the approach of the second sun, or we're trying to draw into other things. Sacred Mesa, a new ad for me. At the beginning of your upkeep, sack it unless you sacrifice a Pegasus. Now this works with Arcana Sun's Grace as well because they both make Pegasus tokens, but it says 2 mana, create a Pegasus. So if we've got just a ton of extra mana, we dump them in and make a bunch of Pegasus tokens, and then we have one around to sacrifice, and then we always can have enough Pegasus sitting around to help us out. Paladin class. The first ability is well worth the 1 mana, costing everything our opponents do on our turn to cost 1 more to cast, because most of the time people aren't leaving up enough mana except what they need to do a counterspell. For 3 mana, all of our creatures get a flat +1/+1, and then for 5, we get the attack boost. But more often than not, this is just a 1 mana enchantment that we can play to get a card or 2 once we have our enchantresses out. Sigil of the Empty Throne, making us 4/4s every time we cast Angels. This is perfect. This is one of the ways we can win the game. Mirari's Weight, giving all of our creatures flat 1/1 and then doubling the amount of mana our lands produce, and that's great. It's going to definitely push us forward. Intangible Virtue, giving all of our creatures vigilance and +1/+1. Utopia Sprawl, doing a very similar thing to Wild Growth, except we get to, very similar thing to Fertile Ground, except it can only enchant a forest and we get to pick our color. Authority of the Consul is going to have all our opponent's creatures in the battlefield tapped, but we gain a life for each one. Hollowed Haunting, whenever we control 7 or more enchantments, all creatures we control have flying and vigilance. This is another potential way we can win the game by just giving all of our creatures flying and vigilance and getting around a lot of our opponents. And then whenever we cast in Enchantment, we get a white cleric that's a star, where star is the amount of spirits we control. Or a spirit cleric, where stars the number of spirits we control. So the more spirits we make with this, the bigger they all get. They just get bigger and they can help in the game. My pick for the single best enchantment in this deck is Solitary Confinement. Due to how much we draw in this deck, it's never a problem to have to pitch a card every now and then. This is the beginning of your upkeep. Sacrifice Solitary Confinement unless you discard a card. Well, in this deck, you almost always have spare lands you don't need in your hand, so you don't mind pitching one. Skip your draw steps. We no longer draw at the start of our turn with this out. We have Shroud, so we cannot be targeted with single target damage spells, with damage abilities, that kind of thing. And then prevent all damage will be dealt to you. So we would still lose life from life effects, but we cannot be... if we're attacked, we do not take damage. We cannot be targeted by damage abilities. Solitary Confinement shuts off most of our ways for our opponent killing us and should give us enough time to figure out the rest of it. Cryptolith Right, allowing all of our creatures to tap for mana. Ashes of the Abhorrent, players can't cast spells from graveyards or activate abilities of cards in graveyards. That kind of helps nerf our graveyard friends, but it also says whenever a creature dies, you gain a life. That pushes our life gain forward. Seal of Cleansing is another one of these cards, kind of like that Aura of Silence and Seal of Primordium, where they come down and then we can sacrifice them to destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is just instant speed response to those big combos, and I think it's very needed in a format like Commander, where, like I said, a lot of your combos have to deal with enchantments and artifacts. Wolf Willow Haven comes in, lets a land tap for an additional green, but we can sacrifice it to make a token. Overgrowth comes down and lets a land tap for 2 additional green. Ethereal Armor lets our creature get +1/+1 for each enchantment you control and has first strike. This just helps. We can give it to a big creature, or give it to a creature in the air, or give it to one of our tokens and have them attack through for damage, or we just give this to Sythis and threaten people with commander damage. Exploration lets us play an additional land on our turns. Blind Obedience, artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Ancestral Mask, the big one of those abilities. Creature gets +2/+2 for each other enchantment on the field, all of them, ours and our opponents. And that comes in a lot of handy depending on what you're playing against. Ancestral Mask can be very scary. Cleric class, whenever we would gain life, we gain that much +1 life instead, giving us 2 life off of each cast with Sythis and not just 1. And then for 4 mana there, we pretty much replace Heliod. It has a very similar effect. Whenever you gain life, put a counter onto a creature with your control. So technically, with enough life gain, we could use Walking Ballista without Heliod. It's just a lot easier to do it with Heliod. And then for 5 mana, we return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and we gain life. It goes to its toughness. Sylvan Library, going to help us out with those draws. We don't mind paying the life for it because we are going to have plenty of extra draws. Mirri's Guile, at the beginning of our upkeep, we look at the top 3 cards and put them back in any order. This is going to help us pick our draw for the turn, kind of like Library, and determine what we can draw on that turn. Survival of the Fittest, probably the single most expensive card in the deck, tied with one of our lands, allowing us to pay a green, discard a creature card, search for a creature card, and put that into our hand. The great part about this is if we need a Walking Ballista or Heliod, we can go get them with Survival of the Fittest. It just helps us out with the things that we need. Like if we see the Gauntlets of Light, but we don't see Sanctum Weaver, we can do that as well. It just helps us out. Michiko's Reign of Truth, 1 and 2, give a creature +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact in enchantment you control. Which is going to buff our creature, and then it flips over to be a star, where star is the number of artifacts and enchantments you control, so it just becomes big on the backside. Luminarch Ascension, allowing us to make angels for 2 mana. Most of the time we're going to have plenty of mana, and so Luminarch Ascension just helps us out in being able to dump our mana somewhere if we need to. Also, we make them at instant speed, so we can use them for blockers. And then Darksteel Mutation, a little bit of removal, turning a creature into a 0/1 insect that loses all its abilities, is indestructible, and loses all their abilities, card types, and creature types. It just shuts down a creature and stops our opponent from getting the value they probably want. their creature. All right, moving into the lands, we'll start with our basics first. There were no, of course, there were no sketch basics, so I chose to use the Kamigawa basics. They're some of my favorites. 6 plains and 7 forests. Normally we want access to both of our colors very quickly. We ideally want to get Sythis down on 2, so we always want to have our mana available, which is why we're using a lot of other things. City of Brass, very good in this deck because we don't care about the damage. We're almost always going to be gaining life, and that's going to get us any color we want. Nykthos can tap to add a color equal to our devotion to that color. Since we're playing a lot of permanents, we're always going to have enchantments down on the battlefield. Our devotion to this is going to get pretty big. Canopy Vista enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Reliquary Tower, we have no maximum hand size, which is great since of how many cards we're going to be drawing. Yevimaya turns all of our lands into forests. We have the Branchloft Pathway. Sun Petal Grove comes down if we control into the battlefield untapped if we control a forest or plains. Brushland can add a Seether for the cost of a life, which we don't mind. Temple Garden comes in tapped unless we pay 2 life. We probably don't mind with the amount we're gaining. Overgrown Farmland from Midnight Hunt. Bountiful Promenade comes in untapped when we have 2 or more opponents. Wooded Bastion, just a little bit of filtering, but it is helpful when you only have a certain type of mana available and need both. Hall of Healage Generosity can get us a land back from our graveyard and put it on top of our library if our opponent removes one of them, which is pretty great. It's pretty helpful. Mana Confluence, same thing. We don't mind paying the life to get the color since we're gaining so much life. Windswept Heath can go get any of our dual lands. Horizon Canopy allows us to pay a life to get either color or pay it to draw, which is great. Command Tower, Fabled Passage can go get any of our basics. Reflecting Pool will tap for either as soon as we have both colors. And then the other most expensive card in our deck is Sarah's Sanctum, allowing us to tap for a white for each enchantment we control. Most of the time we have such a big board of enchantments that it taps for a lot of mana. Well, guys, that is it. That is my Sythis Harvest hand list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This deck is a ton of fun to play. It's a little combo-y. It's a little big boardy. It has a lot of fun stuff to it. What do you guys think? Are there any cards you would add to your Sythis list? Are there any cards I missed? Shoot them down in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion, and I will catch you next time.